Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
I am thrilled to have the pleasure of speaking with Marcus Martin, a true powerhouse in the world of private equity investing. Marcus has dedicated his career to helping businesses thrive by leveraging his experience in corporate finance, strategy development, and private equity investing. As a partner at Fulcrum, Marcus, partners, and team are committed to creating increased value in the companies they invest in. With over 15 years of experience in the industry, Marcus has seen it all, from the challenges and risks of launching a new company to the satisfaction of taking an established business to the next level. Marcus, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, David. Glad to be here.
Great. You're originally from Columbus, Ohio, and left, but you ended back there. So you have an opportunity to go back there again? Why?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first and foremost, I love the city of Columbus. I think it's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. There's a lot of energy. I'm a big family guy, and I have a large family, and most of those individuals are still here in Columbus. And so my mother's still here. And so it's given me an opportunity to spend a lot more time with them, have my kids around my family. And then on a personal level, I take care of my father, who has dementia now from a surgery he had a few years ago. And so I wanted to make sure that he had a chance to spend whatever years he has left on this earth around family as well. And being back in Columbus allows me to make that more of a possibility for him. And then, lastly, it's only a 45-minute flight to DC, where the area where our offices are. So it's easy for me to get to and from our offices when I need to.
Thanks for that. It seems like a great values choice. Tell me about your relationship with money. I understand your childhood consisted of playing football, watching X-Men, and counting money. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, you nailed it. I don't know exactly what started it, but I've always had a fascination with saving and accumulating money. I don't know why. I was always treasurer for student council. I never aspired to be vice president or president of any of the organizations. I always wanted to be the treasurer. Up until my senior year of high school, when I decided I will be president of the class. When I got my first job, I saved every check. I kept them in a shoebox so that I had a record of everything. And ultimately, I think I love numbers. I remember at an early age, I probably was 4 or 5 years old. My parents bought me this. It was a game, I guess, if you will, like a computer handheld game, and it was a counting device. And I took that thing everywhere with me, and you literally could hit a button, and it would just start counting, or it would start doing multiplication, or it would start doing division, and I would just play it on and on. And my parents and my brothers and my cousins, they were like, "Can you just leave, or can you take that away?" And so from a very early age, numbers have always fascinated me. I like how, to me, they're black and white. They tell a story. And so oftentimes people can say a lot of stuff, right? Feels like fluff to me. But then you look at the numbers, and the numbers may tell a different story. And so you're right. On Saturday mornings, I'd wake up. If we had a football game, I'd go play football. I'd come back from the game. I'd watch X-Men, because I'm also very much into sci-fi and fantasy. And then we had this like glass pig. It was probably 1.5 feet long, maybe 10 inches high. And my parents always threw loose change in it. And so what I would do is dump that change out when it got big enough, and I'd get the coin rollers, and I would sit in my room, and I'd count, and I'd roll the coins. And I don't know, it was just fascinating for me. And I always thought that one day I would be like a CFO for an NFL team, because it felt like it was combining my passions. But that was prior to me knowing what private equity was and what this world that I'm in now, that it even existed.
Okay, along the lines of lessons learned in football, Joe Mowgli, the former chairman and CEO of TD Ameritrade and head football coach at Coastal Carolina, we had on the podcast, spoke about the similar lessons learned from football and business. Do you see it that way?
100%. And I take it even a step further and say the lessons I learned in football, I think apply to life as well. It's funny, my wife and I, we have a running joke that, we're going to write a book one day because I'm always using football metaphors to explain either relationships or life or how to be, because I just think, I think it's the greatest sport and game on the planet. But I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you're in your place of business and you make a mistake, right? You were supposed to, you got a decimal out of in the wrong place, or you have to go back to your client and tell them that you made this mistake, right? Well, in football, you make mistakes as well. And I was a defensive back, and sometimes you get burned by the receiver, right? Because they're scholarship players too. They're talented athletes too. And if you dwell on that mistake, it will cripple you and you'll never get better. And so they always tell you in football, especially as a defensive back, you have to have a short memory. You have to be able to put things behind you and look forward to the next play. You have to take that same approach in business too. Look, you're going to make mistakes. Right? It just happens. But how do you respond to that mistake? Do you use it as a learning lesson and get better so that it doesn't happen again and again? Or do you let it take over you and control you and cripple your ability to make good decisions? So I 100%, I think the game of football can be used to teach all kind of lessons. You think about the adversity that you have to go through, the physical and mental anguish that you have to go through in order to achieve your ultimate goal, and have that commitment and have that discipline to that. I think if you can take those lessons and you apply them to business, your personal life, your relationships, you can have a lot of success.
It's a good thing you haven't been beat deep many times in your life. How did your passion for finance and perhaps football lead you to Morehouse College?
Yeah, it's really really interesting. I had never heard of Morehouse College growing up. They weren't a big name college in Ohio, and specifically in Columbus. And I was in a program in high school called Upward Bound, and Upward Bound was all about helping lower income families, their children, get exposure to college level courses and exposure to colleges to help you go off to college one day. So one day, this was my senior year of high school, there was a woman who was affiliated with the Upward Bound program named Catherine Willis. She's just one of those individuals who kind of knew everybody around the city. And she came up to me because she knew at the time I was looking at some private schools in and around Ohio, Wittenberg, Denison, Ohio Wesleyan, because I wanted to play football. And I wasn't big enough, fast enough, strong enough to go play at Ohio State. So, those were my options. She said, Marcus, like, look, those are great schools, but you really look like you could be a Morehouse man. And I kind of looked at her sideways and said, what is that? Like, what is a Morehouse man? And so she connected me to two Morehouse alums that lived in the city. One graduated with Martin Luther King, and so it was really fascinating hearing his story. He graduated Morehouse in 1948. The other one was a doctor in town. You have to understand, I don't come from a family with a bunch of doctors and a bunch of college graduates, and so these black men were really inspiring to me. But nonetheless, I still hadn't been to the campus or anything like that. I sent an application to them. And then, as fate would have it, my senior year, I got the Coca-Cola scholarship, which takes 250 of the quote unquote best and brightest high school students from across the country and brings them down to Atlanta, Georgia for a weekend. We do community service, we do interviews, there's a banquet, and you're guaranteed money. And then there's an opportunity to get even more while you're down there. But so that was the first time that I got on an airplane, and I went to Atlanta, and I had an uncle who lived about 30 minutes south of the city. He came up and he took me over to Morehouse campus while everybody else went on the tour of CNN. And that was my first exposure to Morehouse. And I met with the business career placement officer. He introduced me to a couple students who were getting ready to go off to this place called Wall Street. And I was like, I don't know what Wall Street is, but that sounds impressive. You're about to make $10,000 in the summer and you get to live in New York. I mean, that sounds really amazing to me. Um, and and it was at that moment that it felt like home. Every other college that recruited me, either academically or athletic, kind of pointed to, here's this famous person who went to our school. I was like, well, every college should have at least one. But Morehouse was the first school that showed me guys who were a couple years older than me, who were going off and doing amazing things that I couldn't even fully comprehend and appreciate. And I just knew I wanted to be around that. And so that's what got me to Morehouse. And I knew I wanted to be a finance major kind of going in. And yeah, so that's how I ended up at Morehouse.
You're the second humble rock star guest on the podcast that went to Morehouse. We had Rodney Harrington, founder of Channing Capital Management. What's in the water there that's so special?
It's a great question. Look, I think it's because the college knows what it's trying to do. And what it's trying to do is create the next generation of leaders. And it just so happens to be that because it's a historically Black college and it's an all-male college, that leadership is largely built around trying to make African American men feel comfortable that you can be a leader, you can achieve anything that you want to put your mind to, which in our country isn't always the theme or the message that gets sent to African American men, right? And so I think Morehouse leans really heavily into that. And when you get on the campus, you know, for many of us, it's the first time you're in an environment where you are around 2,000 to 3,000 other African American men who just want to go off and do great things in this world, whether that be for, they want to be pastors, they want to be lawyers, they want to be doctors, they want to be finance people, they want to be entrepreneurs, whatever the case may be. And nobody's judging you and looking at you saying, oh, well, you're here because you're on an athletic scholarship, or you're here because of affirmative action, or you're here because of this. It's like, no, you're here because you want to be great. And you're around other people who want to be great. And you just get to enjoy that. And there's a lot of heritage, there's a lot of history that comes along with that. So I really think that's part of the special sauce, if you will, or what they're pouring in the water there at Morehouse to help kind of indoctrinate us a bit.
Following up on that, how important were the internship you had there and how they impact your career?
Oh, life-changing. As I mentioned before, I had zero idea what Wall Street was when I got to Morehouse. And I didn't know what consulting was either. And how I ended up doing both of those internships is my freshman year, my mentor, who I'm still best friends to this day with, he was a senior and he had done those things already. He says, look, if you're going to be a top finance major at Morehouse College, then you need to go do a summer of investment banking and you need to do a summer in consulting. And so I said, okay, right, you're the smartest guy I know, so I'm going to go do those things. And I did it, and it just opened my eyes up to a completely different world that I didn't have a full appreciation for or knew existed. When I spent that 10 weeks in New York at Credit Suisse First Boston, you're watching people wear $5,000 suits and working all hours of the day and doing some of the largest transactions in the economy, and how fast paced it was and how smart everybody was. I mean, it was a little bit like a drug in a sense that you wanted to prove that you could do this too. But you also start learning about different parts of the capital markets. And then you flip that, and I tried a summer of consulting, and then you start seeing how decisions are getting made at these these Fortune 100 companies, these Fortune 500 companies. And you also start to realize that, hey, the people here doing these amazing things, I don't feel like they're that much smarter than me, or that I can't get to that level either. And so now my confidence is building, and I'm saying, yeah, even though I came from a inner city, maybe lower income type environment, now that I'm here, I believe that I can stand my own. And so having those internships gave me the confidence that I could go apply for any type of full-time job to whatever I wanted to do. And I knew that I wanted to be around business, and I knew I wanted to help figure out how to solve problems. Those were things that were fascinating to me, and they gave me exposure to that.
Was it Credit Suisse Consulting, or tell me about your first job, private equity job at HIG? Is that where you fell in love with it?
I would say that I fell in love with private equity at Riverside, the Riverside company, which was my second private equity job. HIG was fascinating in the sense that it was my first job into private equity, where I was just really starting to understand what private equity meant. It's funny. I look back now on all of the interviews that I went on when I was trying to get my first private equity job, and I just realized how silly I must have sounded in some of those interviews, because I didn't really know what I was doing. All right, what I knew about private equity was, hey, they raise money, they invest money. I didn't really appreciate the nuances between venture capital versus private equity versus growth equity, and all the kind of the different machinations of it. I just knew, hey, I want to get into private equity because this is another avenue that people commonly take who have followed a similar path to me. And so HIG I started to learn more about that. And I was doing growth equity investments at HIG, but it was a small team, and it was a team that, I felt like was still trying to figure itself out. It wasn't very regimented. There weren't a lot of systems in place. It was just kind of come to work and kind of do some stuff, and we're trying to figure it out. And that was okay, except that as a junior person, I think it pays to have structure so that you can learn more effectively and efficiently. So then I took the job at the Riverside company, which allowed me to then move back to Ohio, at the time, Cleveland, Ohio. And Riverside, I mean, they had been around since 1988. They had multiple funds. They were very regimented, and we were doing deals, and lots of them. And I just was learning so much. And then what I also appreciated about that is, because we were doing lower middle market deals, most of the companies that we bought were still led by the founders. That was really addictive for me, because like founders they're just different, right? Than a person who was brought in with an MBA to kind of run the business and thinks about it purely from a kind of a black and white and numbers and metrics and KPIs, et cetera. The founders have a different type of passion, right? They feel a certain way about their employees, and then listening to their stories of why they started the business and how they've grown it, and then learning about all these different industries. That's when I really, really fell in love with private equity and felt like this is where I needed to be long term.
Was it the founders, or you became an operator and ran KeyBank's small business division? What was it like in terms of learning, turning it around, value creation, people, process, and strategy, and other things relating to actually running an operation?
When I was at Riverside, and the funny thing is, all the guys in private equity, we think that we're the smart ones, right? And we tend to mostly be capitalists by our nature, which makes sense. But I sat back and I saw the guys who were getting the big checks were the people who started companies, whose companies we were buying, right? They were getting 10, 15, 20, $30 million checks in one fell swoop, right? And they seemed to have much more control over their life, right? You worked a lot, of course, but they had control over where they wanted to be, where they needed to be. And so that started to spark my interest in wanting to be an entrepreneur as well. And I figured, I was like, how can I do private equity and be an entrepreneur all at the same time? And then at that point, I couldn't leave Riverside and go straight into running my own fund, right? That was going to require many, many, many more years of being at Riverside in order to try to have a chance at maybe raising my own fund. And on top of that, I didn't feel like as a private equity person that I had operations experience. And if I was going to run my own firm one day, I felt it was important to be in a position where I was managing people, I was managing a P&L, and I had to make those types of decisions. And I had to learn about, well, what is it like to be in an environment that isn't necessarily a private equity firm's environment? And so that's why I made the transition to Key Bank. And, I remember when I made the transition, a lot of people kind of gave me the side eye. Why would you leave private equity to go work at a bank? And more importantly, work on the community bank side of the bank versus the corporate bank, right? Because it meant less money and things like that. But I knew for me, I wanted to be more on the business side of things because I needed to learn. Because I knew one day I was going to try and be an entrepreneur, and going onto the corporate bank side of the equation wasn't going to help me advance that skill set. It was going to be a lot of the same type of things that I was experiencing on the private equity side of the world. And so now I'm doing reviews for people. I'm hiring folks. I'm trying to think about how do we connect with our customers in a way and provide them the right services. And so all those things that you pointed out, like finding the right people, developing processes, thinking about strategy, and then more importantly, being the one who had to figure out how to execute those things. It was hugely valuable and giving me a skill set that made me comfortable to go off and launch my own thing one day.
So that made the opportunity and the transition of leaving Key Bank to founding the Inkwell Group because you felt you were ready to go and you had all the skills. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
100%. Absolutely. And then the other thing that I would say is we had a kind of catalyst event as well. My partner in Inkwell Group, who's also now one of our partners in Fulcrum as well, Chijoke, he was at another business as an EVP there, and that business was being bought for a relatively large sum of money, of which he was going to, participate in that windfall. And at that exact same time, Key Bank was going through an acquisition of its own where they were acquiring a large bank out of New York. And so we looked at each other and said, there's a lot of transition happening at both of our organizations. We've done pretty well for ourselves over our careers. We've talked about branching out and doing our own thing for a long time now. Why not now? When is it going to be the perfect set of circumstances? And the answer is there's never really a perfect set of circumstances. You just got to get out there and go do it. And that's what we did. We made the decision. We felt like we had learned enough and we were ready, and we took the leap of faith.
And then you went ahead with Choke and pivoted and made the decision to go to Fulcrum. Could you explain why you did that and what you weighed on that process?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, we had known Ben and Harrison for a few years at this point when we decided to raise the fund for Fulcrum. We had been working with them off and on. We met them during our Inkwell days, and we got a chance to see that they had a similar perspective on value creation and what private equity could do to have more of an impact on our country as opposed to just making money, right? Making money is great, and we all want to do that. Don't get us wrong from that perspective, but private equity can be so much more, right? And it has the ability to create so much more value for individuals. And so when you had the events of kind of 2020 happening, and so much social unrest and all the injustices that were happening in our country, we started to see a shift in the LP environment, where they were placing much more emphasis on ESG investing and impact investing, and how can we start to impact the racial wealth gap and things like that in a way that we hadn't ever seen before. We got together, and Ben and Harrison, said, "Hey guys, we think that there's an opportunity to raise a fund here. You guys have an amazing network of executives. We have a starting place of investors that want to come along with us. Why don't we go out here and raise this fund and really scale up what we've kind of been doing on an independent deal basis?" And Chijioke and I, we talked a lot about it, because while we saw the merits of all of this, the reality is we had to kind of make a decision to say, do we want to formalize this partnership in a way that, before it might have been a little bit optional if we did a deal together or not. Now it's saying, no, we're doing a firm together, we're making decisions together, and the four of us are going to make this work. And ultimately, of course, we decided that it would make sense, and we were going to do this, and that the vision for Fulcrum, it could be so massive, right? And what we were going to be able to accomplish over the next 20, 30, 40 years under this brand of Fulcrum, I think was really alluring and got us really excited. And so that's why we made the decision to kind of make the leap.
That makes sense. And I want to take a deeper dive into value creation, but we have to stop here. Coming up in the second part of my conversation with Marcus Martin, partner at Fulcrum, Marcus will elaborate on how unleashing the power of eliminating the racial wealth gap and investment in underserved communities powers extraordinary returns and the principles that guide their investment decisions.
It is our job to make sure that we're generating strong returns for investors. Otherwise, investors won't invest with us anymore, and then we won't be able to have the impact that we're trying to have. Plain and simple.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book set, The Principles of Cartel Disruption and Secret Stories of Leadership, Growth, and Innovation, are available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.